right. Hello, everyone. Happy Monday. Happy Monday. Glad to be here, back for another incredible episode. And of course, we have an amazing guest and Azeem today. You guys are in for an incredible treat. Really awesome background. You can take some time to look into that after this episode, but because it is a holiday and we're doing the Lord's work here today to bring you this conversation. Want to definitely stick to our time. So without further ado, let's get into it. Zine, tell us a little bit about you. Give us that kind of 30-second minute elevator pitch about
Ooh,
who you are and what you're up
okay.
to today.
Okay. 30-second elevator pitch. I have been in crypto for somewhere between 12 and 13 years at this point. I started writing about Bitcoin at the end of 2013. Fast forward to today, I'm the co founder of Miden, which is a new ZK blockchain. We announced a 25 million seed round earlier this year with A16Z, 1KX, and Hack VC leading our round. Outside of that, am a consultant with the UNICEF Crypto Fund. I write with Forbes. I write with CoinDesk. I've been part of the World Economic Forum's Crypto Sustainability Coalition. I keep myself busy. I have and finally, I have a very supportive wife who allows me to do all of that.
I love it. I love it. And before we do get into it, folks, just so you know, nothing that we discuss here is going to be considered financial advice. Everything that we discuss is obviously of our own opinions. Do not necessarily represent our respective organizations. And last but not least, if it's anything that's probably a little bit too spicy for a family dinner during the holidays, we'll avoid those topics here. But we're all adults and we love to keep these conversations interesting. So, as you were alluding to, Azim, and most would consider you an OG. You've been in this since I think it was 2012. You got back into this, and as I
Something like
recall, I
that.
think that you were talking about just kind of like hanging out, on crypto Twitter and thinking more about like money, value, and what centralization meant to you. So,
Mhm.
what was it about that? That moment in time, and also to that particular rabbit hole that kind of kept pulling you in the first place.
So at the time, it was 2012, and I was applying to medical schools. I was working in a biotech company in Boston, and I was applying to medical schools at the time. And I was just spending more time on Twitter. I think I joined Twitter in 2008, 2009, and like had seen musings of what Bitcoin is. But while I was working at this job and applying to medical school, I just had more time where I would come across people having these conversations. And I think it was the first time I'd ever really sat and thought about, from an intellectual perspective, about what gives money value as a
Yes.
whole. And there were just really interesting articles by people who had written things, whether it was the history of money, the idea around the gold standard going away and what that meant for the actual value of our currency over time,
Yeah.
and questions that they asked that forced me to sort of think through logical decision trees. And when I thought through, if there's a group that can sort of print money on demand, and then there's nothing that actually backs that similar to what the gold standard would be, then why doesn't that over the course of time put us in a position where we end up having a valueless currency? And what
Yeah.
does it look like to have a decentralized arbiter who does decide? And what are the rules for that? And, thinking about, and this goes a little deeper, but, if the power of the dollar, let's say in the United States, is really just backed by, the number of guns and missiles that we have, what does that mean for the United States as other people get more guns and missiles? And so
Mm.
it was just like an intellectual exercise that I found to be fascinating. And the people that I was meeting at the time just had a lot of really interesting intellectual perspectives also to share on it, and interesting readings. And that's really what brought me into this space to begin with.
Yeah, I love it too, man. Like, I'm still amazed, even today, just the overwhelming number of just like overall interesting people that
Hmm.
are attracted to this industry. It's something that's really unique. And speaking about some of the other thing that you're doing other than running a business, right? You mentioned that you wrote back for Huffington Post when
Hmm.
this was like the New York Bitcoin Center opened. I believe this was 2013. So even going back
Correct.
further, right? So like
Yeah.
looking back then, what stands out to you about the early days compared to the space today?
To be really frank, I think the biggest thing is at the time I felt there were much more mission and value aligned cypherpunks who realized that Bitcoin came about in an environment that was the 2008 financial meltdown, and
Mm,
this was created by the big banks. And it was in response to what the big banks had created. And so this was supposed to be something that was opposed to the big banks. And what's so interesting today is that, it would be easily argued that the 2024 bull run was started with the BlackRock ETF announcements. And now every week, what crypto has become about is finding a way to make sure that the same governments and traditional finance organizations that caused the financial meltdown are now the ones that we want on our side to be able to offer validity and credibility to the things that we're building in the space. And so it's felt like it's become much more about whether the number of the price of the asset that I own goes up. And that's
Mm,
really, at the end of the day, what matters most. And, we're all guilty of this. Miden is looking to work at institutional adoption and
exactly.
understanding,
Yeah.
how is it that we have a blockchain that can bring enterprise, government, traditional finance, and just traditional just institutions as a whole on chain using compliance and privacy. But I would say that general ethos has sort of for months now, actually, especially since we hit the 100K mark, really had me questioning: uh, did Bitcoin win or lose? And I don't
Mm.
actually have an honest answer yet.
Yeah, and for those two, maybe I mean we can talk about this forever, but um, maybe there might be some new people in the audience that have never heard of what the whole cypherpunk movement was about. So can you talk a little bit more about like what that was like and just the kind of ethos of the creation of Bitcoin in the first place?
I mean, these were just true libertarians who didn't, who believed that a decentralized entity in the software that, you know, was truly neutral. And, there's 21 million Bitcoin ever. Anyone can mine them. That, over time, like holding this will be able to accrue value. And, you can self custody it. You don't have to custody this with someone else. If you don't own your keys, you don't own your Bitcoin. There were so many of these like extremely libertarian takes when it came to all of this stuff, that there were just like these very eccentric, wealthy people that had these like beliefs about freedom at the end of the day. And now it's much more about like, does the CEO of BlackRock and Larry Fink believe that now that he's already said, Bitcoin is valuable, that he decides that, real world assets are now valuable? And how early am I in making sure that the assets that I own are going to appreciate in value?
Yeah. You know, what's interesting. I think it was like Jack Dorsey. I don't know if it was recently, but he had said something about, going back to the original, Bitcoin white paper and mentioning that
Hmm.
it was meant to be a peer-to-peer decentralized payment network, and that
Hmm.
if it's just considered what a lot of people are calling it today as a store of value, that, maybe
Hmm.
Bitcoin hasn't won. So it's really interesting that you said that, Azeem. Now, shifting gears a little bit, and I remember when we talked about this, but you've mentioned that technical people get a lot of respect in the industry, while maybe sometimes these non-technical folks are often labeled as scammers, right? So, how do you
Hmm.
think someone can add real value and credibility without actually being super technical?
So I myself am not super technical, and I think one of the things that's been interesting in this space is so many of the software developers that came in early on. uh, a lot of the earliest Bitcoin people were technical in nature, from
Yeah.
everyone that I'd met. And the reality of anything is, in any business, there's product and then there's distribution. And so we had a lot of the product focused people, and we little by little started bringing in the distribution focused people. And
Mm.
I think one of the reasons that so many of the non-technical people are seen as scammers in some capacity is that so many of them were, snake charmers, understood how to be able to utilize that. There's no regulations. So many people have been able to amass massive amounts of wealth in pretty private ways and just run off with people's money, and there be no retribution for it. And
Yeah.
so what we've found over the years has generally just been that there are people who know how to understand how to create the value, and then the people that are going out and selling the value, like SBF was a technical person, but like we've seen so many of the issues that he caused. And I think in general, we've just found this industry has had so many of the folks that are doing the sales aspect of it just personally enriching themselves. And we see it even today in many of the the culture around Lamborghinis and gold watches and like private planes, and there's so much of that's antithetical to the ideas of privacy and freedom that really like came about. And so as a non-technical person myself, it's why I've actually for years now been super intentional about, doing things like, some of the consulting work with the United Nations and UNICEF's crypto fund, for
Yes.
writing for organizations like Forbes, for having done deals with UNICEF and Shell Oil and the American Cancer Society, and working with the World Economic Forum has been, what are the things that I need to do, not even necessarily to the people within crypto to show that I'm not one of these scammers, but particularly to the folks outside of our industry, is to show the badges of legitimacy and credibility that legacy institutions are accustomed to seeing, so that I can, without having spoken to them, put some sort of trust on my name, so that they know that they can deal with me in peace, basically.
Yeah, and building up on that a little bit, mentioning, I mean, you built these companies, UNICEF, Mercy Corps, raised tens of millions of
Mhm.
dollars. But one of the things that I recall that we originally chatted is said that you're not a multimillionaire, and that I
I
think
am not. No.
that's intentional, right? And a lot of people like when you have these conversations, they're like, "Oh my God, you've been in crypto for how long? You must have a Lamborghini and a yacht and a boat
Yeah.
and all these things." But kind of how do you balance? I would say this ambition with sticking to your principles and the reason why aren't intentionally a multimillionaire.
I think that in general, in any other industry in the world to date, the idea of becoming someone who's worth seven, eight, nine, or even 10 figures was not something that there was an expectation of in a very short period of time, right? Where
Mm,
like there have been examples of, the 12-person team, I believe it was, that founded Instagram, sold for $1 billion, and everyone became very wealthy, in the first few years of having started their business. Within crypto, it's almost become something that's expected, that people should be able to become multimillionaires, decamillionaires, centimillionaires, 12, 18, 24 month timeframes. And so I think part of it for me is I'm a little bit older compared to folks. I've worked in biotech, I've worked in traditional tech, and I've seen, it's not to say that folks in those industries don't become very wealthy, but they know that it doesn't happen in 2 years. Generally you're building a company for 5 to 7 years once you've actually found the company that will be able to achieve success. It's never the first company you do 5 to 7 years in and then you're successful. It's a few
yeah.
companies fail, you find the right company, you're building that for 5 to 7 years, and in that time you either get acquired or you try to go towards an IPO. And so, it's sort of that idea of uh, overnight successes usually take, a decade, right? It looks
And
like,
why do you feel that people tend to have that sense of entitlement?
I think it's because it's so easy in this industry to be able to create extremely liquid assets in
Mm,
pseudonymous or anonymous ways, or things that really aren't even big enough for large governments to want to go after, that has made it easy for people to just scam and become really wealthy really quickly. And I
yeah,
think there's this conflation where I think that, I would love to become a multimillionaire who drives a Lamborghini, but I would like to do it because I have created value in a way that allows me to partake in that value creation. And I don't want it to be because of me figuring out ways to use the same skill sets that I have for value extractive purposes. Right. And I think so. I don't think, there's anything wrong with value creation and capitalism in those ways. My parents moved here from Pakistan as immigrants and achieved the American dream and bought a nice house, and their kids were educated in great ways. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I think there is something wrong with, when you start something with the sole intent of
yes,
personally enriching yourself,
mm,
particularly when you understand that your enrichment needs to come at the loss of someone else. And that's just not a karmic debt that I've been willing to take on. And it's also because I have the personal belief that over a long enough period of time, I will be able to partake in, being able to take part of the value creation that I do. And that with that, I can have, fancy vacations or buy a nice car or finally pay off all my student loans, to be really honest with you.
Yeah, yeah,
Pay off my mother's mortgage. But I've just seen so many teams who are willing to cash in their integrity in the short term because they see money on the table and they're being minimal repercussions for the most part for actually taking that value off the table, right? Whereas if you you know, launched a company on the stock market where you did the same exact things that people do in crypto, the SEC would be on you so quickly and you would have worries of jail time so quickly that there's just more stopgaps in place from people doing something like that. And there just, for the most part, hasn't been in crypto to date.
yeah. I mean, I think that you've recently had conversations with, folks from the SEC as well too, right? So
Mhm.
do you think that, you know, overall as an industry, we're starting to not look at these three-letter organizations as like, the ultimate enforcer, but more of just like a partner that we need to actually start having a real conversation and dialogue about these things that are plaguing our industry?
Yeah, I would say so. And it's something that I've generally been supportive of for years now is that I don't think that our industry should be the Wild West. I think that these regulations have been in place because there have been past incidences that have occurred that have created the need to put laws and regulations into place that are protective for everyone involved. And it's just that because we're a new technology and that the old rules don't apply in a one-to-one capacity, that it's necessary for us to be able to sort of go back to the table and find a way to help make rules that do actually protect end users, do protect people involved in a variety of ways. And that does mean working collaboratively with the, alphabet soup organizations that need to be, involved in this. And so we met with Commissioner Hester Peirce a couple weeks back in Chicago. She's been doing private roundtables for the last couple months in different cities, meeting with builders to sort of try to understand what builders think are the most important things to be worked on at the moment. And I don't know if it'll happen, but there's supposed to be a privacy roundtable with the SEC in Washington, D.C. on Friday next week. But because of the government shutdown, I don't know if that's going to be
Yeah,
paused, right? But
yeah,
I'm happy that we're finally at a place where the regulators are in a position trying to understand and work with the builders on how do we put frameworks into place that make sense for the tech industry that comes with crypto.
yeah. It's so awesome because before it was kind of like, come on in, and now it's like we're coming to the people. We're coming to you to have that actual
Totally.
conversation, which is so refreshing for sure. So, you had talked about this industry maturing, right, to like fintech
Mhm,
3.0, almost
mhm.
like a white collar job. So what does that mean for people that are coming in today, and what do you think skills will really matter in 5 years from now?
Totally. So, I've talked about this for a while with folks. I got my wife into crypto, my then girlfriend, in 2022. She was a successful media person, Forbes 30 under 30. She had a website, like a media website that, was getting eight figures in
Yeah,
traffic on a monthly basis
yeah,
and understood social media and all the platforms. And I really like sat with her and I was like, look, like this industry really needs someone who has someone with your understanding, and the crypto is the learnable part. Or more
mm,
recently have been folks on the side of being able to like design, who understand design really well but they don't understand crypto, and really getting people to see what's interesting, this being fintech 3.0, is that there are uh, basically the same jobs that you would get in outside industries are being overpaid for in the crypto industry, because we really need people with those skill sets. And what I've found multiple times now is that the crypto part is learnable, and you can take a couple months and understand sort of the general needs that you need for crypto. But like if you want to be a designer, for instance, you can't learn everything that it takes to be a designer sort of passively and part time in 2 to 3
yeah,
months. It's a multi year skill set. And so, what I would say in general is that as this industry continues to mature, I would argue that while I don't believe there's true meritocracy anywhere, that this is probably the most meritocratic industry around at the moment, because there's a scarcity of talent. And we're still in the place where a majority of the most important people in this industry are pretty easily to get in touch with, right? Like, if you wouldn't, you wouldn't assume that Mark Zuckerberg or or some of the folks in the Web 2.0 world would be easy to get in contact with. But there are a lot of people in this industry who are running protocols that are worth hundreds and hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. And they're pretty easy to get responses from on
Yes.
Twitter or to get their telegrams or to
Yeah.
answer emails. And so I encourage more people who have skill sets that are valuable to any industry. If you're a copywriter, if you're good at PR, if you're good at BD, whatever it is that you are good at, you know, even if you're someone in the traditional fintech finance world, like those skill sets are all extremely necessary. And more as this industry matures, we need people who actually have the skill sets to do the work. And so spending some time being able to understand how to get involved, I think is just super important.
I love that. And this is a good shift too, because recently you had an interview with Tristan Thompson
Yes,
about his project called Basketball.Fun, and it's a fan-powered prediction markets, right? So, and I think that's even more current with all the conversations about prediction markets and things of that nature throughout the industry. So, speaking about people that are transitioning from one previous career in a prior lifetime to something new and being able to understand the potential of this industry. What about that conversation, Azeem, really kind of like struck you as a shift in how these kind of communities can interact with not only the tech but also the culture?
what was so interesting about that convo with Tristan was that he he's not just a celebrity face whose name has been thrown on. And we spoke about this, and he said, as a former NBA player and a tall black man who walks into a room who has celebrity and fame, people have this pre-existing idea before they even sit down with me that, oh, this isn't a serious person. This
Yeah.
isn't a person looking to do this in a real way. And he used an analogy where when he was growing up in Canada, he was told that people from Canada never make it to the NBA. And
Wow.
so, yeah, and so he said what he's seeing is the same exact thing happening. And for him, it's that, in the past, there were folks who would open up, chains of restaurants. And, Magic Johnson is very well known for being able to be part of multiple franchises and being able to create businesses. Shaquille
Shaquille
O'Neal has,
O'Neal. Yep.
right? Like there are so many that have done things like this. And what he sees happening with the Web3 industry is that this is just the next iteration of where you're able to do that. And so he really is putting his time into understanding what are the things that he needs to do to be taken seriously. And he said that one of my questions to him was actually, 5 years from now, what do you hope that people are able to look back and say about what you're doing today? And he said, the biggest thing that I'm looking forward to is that the same way people looked at me when they said, people from Canada don't make it to the NBA. And when they saw I got into the NBA, he said,
That's
I can't wait for there's going to be a lot of people who are going to come to me and be like, man, I didn't take you seriously, but you were really about it. And I think so much of this right now, like it spoke to me because we really have a lack of culture in the crypto space. It is primarily crypto folks, but as we bring in this is just, it makes me think about I'm a hip hop fan, so I think about how you're able to use the lens of hip hop and how that has been so crucial to adoption of things in mainstream culture and what that's going to look like and the access that's going to bring and the value creation that it'll bring for so many people who aren't in that industry with us right now.
Yeah, and it's like not only like, just diversity of people, but I think it's more importantly just the diversity of thought, right? And
Totally,
just bringing that in and so
totally.
that we're not such in this like tunnel vision type of where we're all talking to each other about the same things.
Other
Like I
ex-
love that. I love actually having conversation with people that are complete crypto skeptics. I mean, because it helps me to reinforce my belief in this, and also too, I think that by teaching others, you continue to educate it's a continuous educational process within yourself as well too.
totally.
Um, so let's talk a little bit about your organization, right? And you're building this compliant private blockchain at Miden, and this is really to avoid this dystopia public ledgers could
hmm
potentially create, right? So can you
hmm
explain, in plain terms why privacy matters so much on chain and what people often overlook?
Totally. So at the moment, for the most part, every single blockchain, how it works is a completely public ledger. And while you're pseudonymous or anonymous in some capacity, because it'll say, this wallet address interacted with the blockchain and did this action. Using certain tools like Chainalysis, it's actually quite easy to already understand who the person is and the IP address behind certain wallets. But as we move into a world where AI can even more easily do that, and you don't need really expensive tooling to understand that, you don't want to be in a place where the entirety of your financial life is available on a public ledger. And that means, you know, what's in your bank account, where you're spending money, who you're spending money with. Maybe you go to Chipotle every day in a specific location and people are able to understand how and where you're going to that Chipotle. What are the things that you're spending on? And I think to date, what's been
Mm,
interesting is that at least Western folks who have adopted using blockchain technology are still very accustomed to having, you know, a bank account, a credit card, debit cards, cash. And so they're doing so much of their personal financial lives privately. They're not paying their rent in a way that everyone knows how much their rent costs or what their mortgage costs or how much money they have in the bank, what they spent on their credit cards last month. But as we move towards a world where the idea of blockchains being sort of the backbone of the global financial system becomes normalized, we can't be in a place where every single one of those things that we're accustomed to having in privacy then become available on public ledgers that AI is able to really easily take a look at. The idea of that is a dystopian future where every single little thing that you do would be monitored so easily, and it wouldn't even take a massive government to do it. It would just take someone using a random AI bot.
yeah. And one of the whenever I sometimes I bring up privacy, right? And one of the common, I would say, rebuttals to that is that, like, well, I don't have anything to hide, so why should I care about that, right? So can
Yeah.
you talk a little bit about that, Azim? And then also too, you mentioned that privacy isn't a crime, right?
Mhm.
But being thoughtful and about compliance is key. And how do you see regulators and innovators finding this common ground in this industry?
So, for the first thing, I'd say it's really easy to say that, I don't have anything to hide, but I think part of it ends up being people have been too privileged to realize that what they've been using crypto for, it's okay if it's on a public ledger to them. If they bought a token for a low price and sold it for a high price, or they bought it a JPEG and they sold it for a high price and sold it, and then ended up selling it and losing money, they don't really care.
Yeah,
But they've become so accustomed to so many of the things that they do being private that they would only start to realize that their privacy is being encroached upon when blockchain potentially starts being the way that things that they've been accustomed to doing privately become public. If you're a company, the idea of every single person's salary being paid out, imagine being able to publicly look at everyone's salary when they got paid and things like that, that I think people just aren't thinking deeply enough about what it is that they care about when it comes to privacy. Privacy is a fundamental human right, in my opinion, or it should
yeah,
be a fundamental human right. And how I think that companies and regulators need to deal with it, honestly, I think that it's going to take some time. The technology is new. Regulators aren't spending their entirety of their days doing this. This isn't something that they grew up with. We're still understanding the implications of how this is going to work. And so for us, being able to do privacy in a compliant manner was even more important because we understand that privacy is important, but we also understand that following the laws is important. And
yeah,
so finding ways that we're going to be able to work with regulators and understand what are the things that need to be done over time are just very important. What that exactly looks like, we're not entirely sure yet. And I think that it's going to take time for it to come to actual fruition. But we've been spending a lot of time understanding that we do need to work with the regulators, and it's not just the regulators here, it's working with the regulators in many of the different jurisdictions that we want to
right,
do, and the
yeah,
complexity of that, the tax implications of that. Like, if you're doing a cross-border settlement of a payment from one country to another, w- where does the tax implication of that payment start and end? And so these are those things where that's why it'll take a long time to get there. But we do believe that you need to be able to have privacy while doing these things.
yeah,
And so we'll see what happens with that.
yeah. I'm looking forward to it. Shifting gears a little bit, and then we'll wrap it up here. But we've also talked about this how about perspective from life outside the industry really kind of
Mhm.
shapes, your approach to being in this industry. So how has seeing the bigger picture helped you navigate all the hype and chaos that happens in crypto, especially with what recently happened a few days ago?
Yeah, it's funny how many people messaged me with what happened a few days ago, and if anyone who isn't aware, the best understanding of it at the moment is President Trump decided to announce 100% tariffs on China starting November 1st, which caused a liquidation event in the crypto industry of over $19 billion, and many people who were playing with options and leverage and perps lost a lot of money. And I
Yeah.
had so many messages over the weekend of people asking me, I hope that you're okay based on what happened. And
Yeah.
I told everyone, like, where I'm probably fortunate is having spent so much time in this space. One of the biggest things that I've learned is that I only invest in assets where I believe in long term. And so I invest in them, I put them into cold storage, and then I don't look at them again. And the reason for that is that I just I've seen after many many years of investing that this is the only way for me to invest, right? Like, had I held on to all of the Bitcoin that I was buying and selling dating back to 2012, 2013, I would be a multi millionaire at this point. But I thought I was some sort of financial savant who was making 5 and 10x Bitcoin, bought it for 100, sold it for 1,000, bought enough, made enough money to buy myself some sneakers, and I thought like I was a genius. Now my biggest lesson from that is just I'm not putting myself in that position anymore. I buy, I hold, and that's just generally it. And has been one of the biggest lessons in how I go about putting any of my like personal finances in any of this. I guess it's the more Warren Buffett strategy than it is anything else.
Yeah, believing in it for long term, man. Well, this is awesome. Thank you so much. We're just over 30 minutes here. I can keep chatting with you forever, man, but I'll definitely let you go and enjoy the rest of the holiday. So thank you so much. This has really been an insightful conversation. Last parting words. How can people keep in touch with you? If people are interested, are you guys hiring? Like anything in the roadmap coming up that people should be aware of?
I would say generally Twitter is where most things happen in crypto. My handle is just AZEEMK underscore. I do check all of my DMs. My DMs are open. And then my email is just ak@miden.team, another place where I do generally check all of my emails. And there have been folks in the past who, like, if you send a properly good cold message, I do read it and I will respond. And so, yeah, if anyone wants to get in touch, please do. And all of the updates would be, on my Twitter. And if there's anything you want to learn, send me a message on Twitter or by email, please.
And you're also on LinkedIn. That's how we connected.
And yes, also on LinkedIn. Yes, I do check all my LinkedIn messages as well.
Awesome, wonderful. Well, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today, Azeem, and everyone else in the audience that is here. This has been a really insightful conversation. We'll get some short clips up soon on LinkedIn, then we'll get this full episode uploaded to YouTube. But thank you all for joining us. You could have been doing anything in the world, but you chose to be here today, and we all appreciate you. Take care. Bye.